I learned the hard way that some people only care about rules until those same rules come back to bite them in the most inconvenient moment possible. My name is Ethan Zimmerman, and I own a small snow removal business in Boulder, Colorado, where winter storms can turn deadly serious in a matter of hours. What happened last February taught me that HOA boards sometimes need a harsh reality check before they understand that not everything fits neatly into their precious bylaws. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when I walked outside to find my backup plow truck missing from my driveway. Not stolen, not moved by some neighborhood kids playing a prank, but completely gone. I stood there in my bathrobe and boots, coffee mug steaming in the February air, staring at the empty spot where my 2015 Ford F-350 should have been parked. My primary truck, a 2020 Ram 3500 with a brand new Mayer plow setup, sat in the garage where it always did. But the backup, which I kept outside because my garage only fit one vehicle, had vanished. My phone rang before I could even process what was happening. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Hello, Mr. Zimmerman, this is Deborah Henderson from the Cascade Creek HOA Board. I'm calling to inform you that your vehicle has been towed from your property for violation of Section 7.3.2 of our community guidelines." I felt my jaw clench. Deborah Henderson. The name alone made most homeowners in our neighborhood cringe. She was the quintessential HOA president, a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an attitude that suggested she'd been waiting her entire life for the power to tell other people what to do. "You towed my truck from my own driveway." The vehicle in question was not properly registered according to our commercial vehicle restrictions. As clearly stated in the guidelines you signed when purchasing your home, commercial vehicles over a certain weight class cannot be parked in visible areas of the community. That truck is essential for my business. We have a major storm coming in tomorrow night. I need that vehicle. Then you should have read the bylaws, Mr. Zimmerman. The truck is currently at Morrison towing on Route 93. You can retrieve it once you've paid the towing fee and provided written assurance that you'll comply with our regulations going forward. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to control the anger building in my chest. The weather forecast had been dominating local news for 3 days. A massive blizzard system was moving down from Wyoming, expected to dump anywhere from 2 to 4 feet of snow on the Front Range. My phone had been ringing non-stop with clients desperate to secure snow removal services before the storm hit. I had 12 commercial contracts and another 8 residential clients counting on me, and Deborah Henderson had just sabotaged my backup plan. I threw on actual clothes and drove straight to Morrison Towing. The facility sat on a gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fence, filled with cars in various states of abandonment and distress. A board attendant sat in a small office that smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. "I'm here for the Ford F-350 that was towed from Cascade Creek this morning." He didn't even look up from his phone. "Towing fee is $400. Storage is $75 per day. It's been here for maybe 3 hours. Still counts as a day." He finally glanced at me. "You want the truck or not?" I paid with my business credit card, each swipe feeling like Deborah Henderson reaching directly into my wallet. The attendant processed the paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone attending their own root canal, then finally handed me the keys. Bay 7. Around the back, my truck sat wedged between a Honda with a smashed front end and a Subaru covered in parking tickets. I did a quick inspection, checking for any damage the tow might have caused. Everything looked intact. I climbed in, started the engine, and headed straight back home, already planning my next move. The Cascade Creek development was one of those planned communities that had sprung up in the early 2000s, full of identical houses with slight variations in facade color and the occasional different garage door style. The HOA governed everything from lawn height to paint colors to where you could park your vehicles. I'd bought my house here 5 years ago because the price was right, and the location gave me easy access to both Boulder and the mountain communities where most of my clients lived. I'd known about the HOA, but like most people, I'd assumed that as long as I kept my property maintained and didn't cause problems, they'd leave me alone. I was wrong. When I pulled into my driveway with the backup truck, Deborah was already standing on my front lawn. She wore a puffy cream-colored jacket and held a clipboard like it was a shield against reason. "Mr. Zimmerman, I thought I made myself clear on the phone." "You did, and I'm making myself clear now. That truck stays in my driveway. We have a major storm coming, and I need both vehicles operational and accessible. The bylaws don't make exceptions for weather events. If you park that commercial vehicle in your driveway, I'll have it towed again." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. "Deborah, I run a snow removal business. Tomorrow night, we're expecting the worst blizzard this area has seen in a decade. I have clients depending on me. If something happens to my primary truck, I need this backup immediately available." "That's not my concern. My concern is maintaining property values and ensuring all residents comply with the guidelines they agreed to follow. Commercial vehicles are an eyesore and set a precedent that could lead to this neighborhood looking like a storage lot. It's a pickup truck with a plow attachment. It's a commercial vehicle over 10,000 pounds registered to a business entity. That makes it a violation." She clicked her pen, a sharp sound like a judge's gavel. "You have until 5 p.m. today to remove it from visible parking areas, or I'll call the towing company again." She turned and walked back to her own house 3 doors down, her boots clicking on the sidewalk with the confidence of someone who'd never faced a real consequence in their life. I watched her go, fighting the urge to say something I'd regret. My neighbor, Frank Morrison, appeared at the property line between our houses. Frank was retired military, a guy in his 60s with a perpetual tan and a realistic outlook on life. He'd lived in Cascade Creek since the development first opened and had served on the HOA board until Deborah had taken over 3 years ago. "She's on a warpath with you, Ethan. Tell me about it. Frank, what am I supposed to do here? I legitimately need this truck for my business." Technically, she's right about the bylaw. It was put in place about 8 years ago when someone tried to park a semi-trailer in their driveway. But there's usually some discretion involved, especially for legitimate situations. Deborah doesn't do discretion, so I'm screwed. Frank scratched his jaw. "There might be a loophole. The bylaw says commercial vehicles can't be parked in visible areas. Does it specifically say you can't park it in your garage?" "My primary truck is in the garage." "Right, but theoretically, you could shuffle them. Keep whichever one you need immediately accessible inside. It's a pain, but it would be compliant." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something. I thanked Frank and spent the next hour reorganizing my garage, moving tools and equipment to create a system where I could swap the trucks relatively quickly if needed. The primary truck went back inside. The backup stayed in the driveway for now, because I had jobs to finish before the storm hit. At exactly 5 p.m., Morrison Towing showed up again. I watched from my living room window as the driver hooked up my backup truck and hauled it away for the second time that day. This time, I didn't bother going to retrieve it immediately. Instead, I called my attorney. James Paulson had handled the closing on my house and had helped with some business contract issues over the years. He listened to my situation with occasional grunts of acknowledgement. HOA law is tricky, Ethan. They have a lot of authority, and you did sign those bylaws when you purchased the property. That said, there might be grounds for a case about reasonable accommodation for business operations, especially if this impacts your livelihood. But that would take time, probably months, and likely cost more in legal fees than it's worth. So what do I do? Short term, comply and find somewhere else to park your truck. Long term, get elected to the HOA board and change the bylaws from the inside, or move. Neither option helped me with the immediate problem. I thanked James and hung up, then spent the rest of the evening monitoring weather reports and finalizing my route plan for tomorrow. The storm was tracking exactly as predicted, expected to hit around 8 p.m. Wednesday and continue through Thursday afternoon. This was the kind of storm that made or broke a snow removal business's reputation. Show up, keep critical areas clear, and clients would remember you next season. Fail to deliver, and you could kiss those contracts goodbye. Wednesday morning came gray and cold. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees overnight, and the sky had that heavy, oppressive look that promised snow. I started my route at 6 a.m., hitting my commercial clients first. A medical office complex in Louisville, a strip mall in Superior, 2 apartment complexes in Broomfield. The primary truck ran perfectly, the new plow cutting through the light overnight snow like it was tissue paper. By noon, I'd cleared all my morning locations and headed home for a quick lunch and equipment check before the real storm arrived. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. The caller ID showed Sarah Chen, one of my residential clients up in Nederland. Ethan, I know the storm hasn't hit yet, but I wanted to confirm you'll be able to get to us. The local weather says we might see 4 feet up here. I'll be there, Sarah. I'm planning to start the mountain runs around midnight once the initial wave comes through. You're a lifesaver. My mom is staying with us and she has a dialysis appointment Friday morning. We need to be able to get out. I'll make sure you can, I promise. I meant it too. That was the thing about this business. People weren't just paying for cleared driveways. They were paying for peace of mind, for the ability to get to work or medical appointments or whatever else life required. I took that responsibility seriously. The storm hit exactly on schedule. By 8:15 p.m., snow was falling so heavily I could barely see Frank's house 3 doors down. The wind had picked up too, creating those swirling patterns that would lead to massive drifts by morning. I was doing a final check of my equipment when my phone rang. Deborah Henderson's number flashed on the screen. Mr. Zimmerman, the HOA board has received several complaints about snow accumulation in common areas. As the only resident with commercial snow removal equipment, we expect you to clear the neighborhood streets and sidewalks. I almost laughed. You want me to plow the neighborhood, for free? As a resident and member of this community, you have a responsibility to help your neighbors. Deborah, I have paying clients who have contracted my services. I can't just abandon them to plow streets that the city is responsible for maintaining. The city plows won't come through until the storm ends. People need to get out for emergencies. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you had my backup truck towed, twice. There was a long silence on the line. That was a separate issue regarding bylaw compliance. No, it was you exercising petty authority without considering consequences. I have a full schedule of contracted work tonight and tomorrow. I don't have time to volunteer for the HOA. This is extremely disappointing, Mr. Zimmerman. I'll be noting your refusal to assist the community in the board meeting minutes. You do that." I hung up before she could respond. I loaded the last of my equipment into the primary truck around 11 p.m. The snow was already approaching 8 inches, coming down in sheets that reduced visibility to almost nothing. This was going to be a long night. I started the engine, let it warm up for a few minutes, and headed out. The highways were a mess, but passable if you took it slow. I made my way to the first commercial client, a 24-hour urgent care facility in Westminster. They needed their parking lot accessible at all times, and they paid premium rates for storm service. I spent 90 minutes clearing the lot and the access drive, making sure ambulances could get in and out safely. The next stop was an apartment complex in Thornton, then back to the strip mall in Superior for a second pass. By 4 a.m., I'd completed the first round of all my commercial contracts and started on the residential clients. The snow had reached 18 inches in most areas, with drifts climbing to 3 feet in spots where the wind had piled it up. My truck handled it beautifully, the new plow system cutting through even the heavy, wet snow near the bottom of the accumulation. I was finishing a driveway in Louisville when I felt something change in the engine. A slight hesitation, a momentary loss of power. Then it smoothed out and I figured maybe I just hit a particularly dense section of snow. But 3 minutes later it happened again. This time the check engine light came on. No, not now. I finished the current driveway and pulled over to the side of the street. When I tried to raise the plow, the hydraulics made a grinding sound and barely lifted. I shut everything down, popped the hood, and climbed out into the still falling snow. Even in the dark, I could see the problem. Hydraulic fluid leaked from a split line near the pump assembly, dripping onto the already soaked ground. The line must have frozen and cracked, a freak failure that shouldn't happen with proper winter-grade fluid. But here we were. I tried to assess whether this was something I could jury-rig temporarily, but without the right parts and tools, I was dead in the water. I pulled out my phone and called Martinez Equipment, the supplier I used for parts. The call went straight to voicemail. Right. It was 5 a.m. on a Thursday during a blizzard. I tried 2 other suppliers with the same result. Then I scrolled through my contacts, looking for any option that didn't involve what I knew I had to do. Finally, I called Morrison Towing for the 3rd time in 3 days. I need my Ford F-350. The one you impounded yesterday. We open at 8. I need it now. I'll pay double the storage fee, triple. I have a truck down and I have clients depending on me. The attendant yawned. Not my problem, man. Come back at 8. He hung up. I sat in my disabled truck, snow piling up on the windshield, and calculated my options. I had 6 more residential clients waiting, including Sarah Chen up in Netherlands with her mother's dialysis appointment. I had commercial contracts that required additional passes before morning rush hour. And I had a backup truck sitting in an impound lot because Deborah Henderson cared more about property values than common sense. I tried calling Deborah. Straight to voicemail. I called the HOA emergency line, which just redirected to Deborah's voicemail. Then, in desperation, I called Frank. He answered on the 4th ring, voice heavy with sleep. "Ethan, what's wrong? My primary truck is down. I need the backup. Morrison Towing won't open until 8. Is there anyone else on the HOA board who might have enough sense to understand this is an emergency?" Deborah is the board president. The other members are Jerry Phillips and Amanda Norton, but they mostly just go along with whatever Deborah wants. What happened to your truck? I explained the hydraulic failure while watching more snow pile up around me. Each passing minute meant I was falling further behind schedule. "Let me try calling Deborah," Frank said. Maybe if it comes from me, she'll listen. 20 minutes later, Frank called back. She's not answering. Ethan, I'm sorry. I don't think there's anything I can do until business hours. Then I'm screwed, and so are all my clients who trusted me to come through. There might be one option. How much would it cost to get a replacement truck? Like a rental for a truck with plow equipment during an active blizzard. Even if I could find one available, we're talking thousands of dollars for a day. And that's assuming anyone has one, which they won't because every snow removal operation in the state already has them contracted. I thanked Frank and ended the call. Then I did the only thing I could do. I started calling clients to explain that I couldn't complete their service. Each conversation was harder than the last. These were people who'd counted on me, who'd paid deposits and signed contracts. Sarah Chen actually cried when I told her I couldn't guarantee getting to her place. Ethan, please. My mother needs to get to dialysis. The appointment is at 9 a.m. if we can't get down the mountain. I'm going to try, Sarah. I swear I'm going to try, but I can't promise anything right now. The sun came up on Boulder County buried under 26 inches of snow, with more still falling. The storm wasn't expected to clear until mid-afternoon. I sat in my dead truck, exhausted and furious, watching the clock tick toward 8 a.m. when Morrison Towing would finally open. My phone rang at 7:30. Deborah Henderson, Mr. Zimmerman. I've been receiving calls all morning from residents demanding to know when you'll be plowing the neighborhood. The streets are impassable. That's what happens during blizzards, Deborah. People can't get to work. There are 3 residents with medical needs who can't get out. This is unacceptable. Something inside me snapped. You want to know what's unacceptable? You had my backup truck impounded during a forecast major storm because of a petty bylaw that nobody else would enforce. Now my primary truck is down. I can't get to the backup until 8 a.m., and I have a dozen clients, including people with actual medical emergencies, who I can't help because you prioritized property values over people's safety. The bylaw is clear. Commercial vehicles. I don't care about your bylaw right now. You created this problem. You own this. How dare you speak to me that way? I'm the HOA president. And I'm the guy who's going to make sure every single person in this neighborhood knows exactly why their streets aren't plowed and why people can't get to their jobs and medical appointments. Congratulations, Deborah. You got your way. I hung up and immediately drove to Morrison Towing. The facility didn't officially open for another 25 minutes, but I parked outside the gate and waited. When the attendant finally arrived at 7:55, I was out of my disabled truck before he'd even unlocked the gate. I need my Ford F-350. Right now. He looked at me like I was insane. We open at 8. It's close enough. I'll pay whatever you want. I have people who need help. Something in my face must have convinced him this wasn't worth arguing about. He processed the paperwork, charged me another day of storage plus an early release fee he probably made up on the spot, and finally led me to my truck. I did the fastest inspection of my life, started the engine to confirm it ran, and immediately headed back toward my disabled primary truck. The backup truck ran fine, but the Plow was an older model, not as efficient as the setup on my primary vehicle. It would have to do. I hooked up the disabled truck to tow it to my mechanic's shop, then started back on my route. It was nearly 9 a.m. by the time I reached Sarah Chen's neighborhood in Nederland. The mountain roads were a nightmare. The county had made a single plow pass hours ago, but fresh snow had already covered most of it. My backup truck struggled in some of the deeper sections, the older transmission grinding as it tried to push through drifts that came up past the bumper. But I made it, finally pulling onto Sarah's Street at 9:45 a.m. Her driveway was buried under 3.5 feet of snow. I dropped the plow and got to work. The older hydraulic system moved slower than what I was used to, and the blade wasn't quite as wide, which meant more passes to clear the same area. But inch by inch, I cut through the accumulation until her driveway was passable. Sarah came out before I'd even finished, still in her bathrobe, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, thank God. We called the dialysis center and they said if we could get Mom there by 11, they'd work her in. Then let's make sure you get there. Give me 10 more minutes." I finished the driveway, cleared the approach to the street, and even knocked down some of the snow piled around her mailbox. Sarah tried to pay me extra, but I refused. This one wasn't about money. This was about doing what I'd promised, even when everything had gone wrong. The rest of Thursday became a blur of exhaustion and determination. I worked straight through, clearing each client property with the methodical focus of someone who knew that stopping meant thinking about how badly this day had gone. The backup truck developed its own issues around 3 p.m., the alternator belt squealing in protest at the constant load. But it held together, grinding through snow that had finally stopped falling around 1 p.m. By the time I finished the last residential property, it was nearly 8 p.m. Thursday night. I'd been working for 21 straight hours. My back screamed. My hands had cramped around the steering wheel. But every single client had been serviced, even if it was hours later than originally planned. I drove home through streets that the city had finally managed to clear, though the neighborhoods remained buried under snow that wouldn't melt for weeks. When I pulled into my driveway at Cascade Creek, I found Deborah Henderson standing on my front lawn. "Again, Mr. Zimmerman, we need to talk." I climbed out of the truck, so tired I could barely focus. "Not now, Deborah." "Yes, now." I've had 9 residents file formal complaints with the HOA about impassable streets. 3 people missed work. 1 elderly resident fell trying to walk to his car through the snow and had to be taken to the hospital. That got my attention. "Is he okay?" He broke his hip. His family is considering legal action against the HOA for failing to maintain safe common areas during a winter weather emergency. I leaned against my truck. That's not an HOA responsibility. That's the city's job. The city didn't come through until this afternoon. "Our residents needed help this morning. You were the only person in the neighborhood with the equipment to provide that help, and you refused." I refused because I had paying clients who'd contracted my services. People like Sarah Chen, who needed to get her mother to dialysis. People who depended on me showing up when I promised. And I could have handled both my contracts and helped the neighborhood if you hadn't had my backup truck impounded for a petty bylaw violation. The bylaw is not petty. It exists to maintain community standards. Community standards. I laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Deborah, you put your standards above people's safety. You had my backup truck towed even though we had a major storm coming. You called it an eyesore. Now someone is in the hospital because you couldn't exercise basic common sense. That's not fair." I was enforcing the rules that all residents agreed to follow. "No, you were exercising power because you could. There's a difference." I pushed off the truck and headed toward my house. "I'm done with this conversation. I've been working for 21 hours straight cleaning up from a storm you helped make worse. If you want to fine me or take enforcement action or whatever else makes you feel important, go ahead. But do it away from my property." She was still standing there when I closed the door behind me. Friday morning, I woke up to 63 missed calls and 47 text messages. Most were from other Cascade Creek residents, people I'd never spoken to before, asking why the neighborhood streets were still buried when I had snow removal equipment. Several were hostile, accusing me of being selfish and not caring about my neighbors. 3 were from local news stations asking for comment on the HOA resident who'd been hospitalized after a blizzard. That last part worried me. I called Frank to find out what was happening. It's getting messy, Ethan. The elderly guy who fell is named Robert Patterson. Nice man, lives alone. His kids are raising hell with the HOA, threatening to sue. Deborah is trying to deflect blame by telling everyone you refused to help during the storm. I refused to work for free for the HOA after she impounded my business equipment right before a major weather event. I know that. You know that. But Deborah is spinning it as you being callous and putting profit over people's safety. She sent an email to the entire neighborhood explaining that she reached out to you for emergency help and you declined. That's not what happened. Doesn't matter. That's the story she's telling, and people are believing it because they're angry about being snowed in. You need to get ahead of this. I spent the next 2 hours drafting an email of my own. I laid out the timeline. Deborah having my backup truck impounded on Tuesday, calling to have it impounded again Wednesday afternoon, my primary truck breaking down Thursday morning, and my inability to access the backup until Morrison Towing opened at 8 a.m. I explained how I'd still managed to service all my contracted clients, despite the equipment issues, including making sure Sarah Chen's mother got to her dialysis appointment. And I pointed out that Deborah's enforcement of the commercial vehicle bylaw directly contributed to the delayed response that she was now blaming me for. I sent the email to the entire Cascade Creek HOA mailing list. Within an hour, my phone started ringing again. This time, the tone was different. Several residents called to apologize for their earlier angry messages. Others wanted to confirm details about the truck being impounded. One person, a woman named Patricia Keller, told me she was organizing a petition to remove Deborah from the HOA board. What she did was unconscionable, Patricia said. To impound your business equipment right before a major storm, that's not enforcing bylaws, that's a personal vendetta. I appreciate the support, but I just want this whole situation to go away. It's not going away, Ethan. The Patterson family is suing the HOA. When that gets to discovery, everything about what happened is going to come out. Deborah is trying to make you the scapegoat, but she's the one who created this mess. Patricia was right. The lawsuit dropped the following Tuesday. Robert Patterson's family filed against the Cascade Creek HOA, alleging negligence in maintaining safe common areas during a winter weather emergency. The complaint specifically mentioned that the HOA had impounded equipment belonging to a local snow removal contractor immediately prior to the storm, potentially limiting response options. That detail caught the attention of a local investigative reporter named Marcus Webb. He called me Wednesday afternoon requesting an interview. Mr. Zimmerman, I'm putting together a story about HOA overreach and how strict bylaw enforcement can create dangerous situations. I'd like to hear your perspective on what happened. I was hesitant. The last thing I wanted was to become the face of some anti-HOA crusade, but Marcus was persuasive. This isn't just about you. I've been investigating Deborah Henderson's tenure as board president. She's been cited by the state for multiple violations of Colorado HOA law. Improper meeting procedures, failure to provide adequate notice of bylaw changes, selective enforcement based on personal relationships. The truck situation fits a pattern. That got my attention. What kind of violations? Last year, she tried to fine a resident for installing solar panels without board approval. Turns out Colorado law prohibits HOAs from unreasonably restricting solar installations. The resident filed a complaint with the state, and the HOA got slapped with sanctions. There are 3 other similar cases. Henderson has been running the board like her personal fiefdom, and people are starting to push back. I agreed to the interview. Marcus came to my house that evening with a cameraman and spent 2 hours documenting everything that had happened. We went over the timeline, the bylaw issues, the phone calls, and the impact on my business. He even recorded footage of the backup truck that had caused all the trouble, with its plow attachment clearly visible. The story aired the following Monday on the evening news. Marcus had done his homework, interviewing not just me but also several other Cascade Creek residents, members of the Patterson family, and even a lawyer specializing in HOA disputes. The segment painted a damning picture of Deborah Henderson as a power-hungry board president, whose rigid enforcement of minor bylaws had contributed to a situation where a resident was seriously injured. The reaction was immediate and fierce. By Tuesday morning, Patricia Keller's petition to remove Deborah from the board had gained over 100 signatures. An emergency HOA meeting was called for Thursday night, and the Patterson family's lawyers amended their lawsuit to specifically name Deborah Henderson as a defendant in her individual capacity, alleging gross negligence and reckless disregard for resident safety. The meeting was held at the Cascade Creek Community Center, a bland room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights that had probably hosted 1,000 similar gatherings over the years. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. I arrived 15 minutes early and still barely got inside. Deborah sat at a table at the front of the room, flanked by the other 2 board members, Jerry Phillips and Amanda Norton. Both looked distinctly uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Deborah, on the other hand, had her chin raised in defiant pride. Patricia Keller stood to address the room once the meeting was called to order. I'm here to present a petition signed by 147 residents calling for the immediate removal of Deborah Henderson as HOA board president and as a board member. The petition cites gross negligence, abuse of power, and actions that directly endangered the health and safety of community residents. Deborah didn't even blink. The petition is noted. However, the bylaws require a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, not just petition signatures, to remove a board member. We have 312 homes in this development. You'd need 208 votes. We're aware of the requirements, Patricia said. That's why we're calling for a special election. Given the severity of the allegations and the pending lawsuit, residents deserve the opportunity to determine whether you're fit to continue leading this board. The meeting devolved into arguments after that. Supporters of Deborah, mostly people who'd served on committees with her, or who shared her rigid view of bylaw enforcement, defended her actions as necessary to maintain community standards. Critics pointed to the Patterson lawsuit, my truck situation, and Marcus Webb's reporting about previous state violations. I wasn't planning to speak, but something Deborah said pushed me over the edge. Mr. Zimmerman had multiple opportunities to comply with clearly stated regulations. His refusal to do so, and his subsequent refusal to provide emergency assistance to his neighbors, reflects a selfish disregard for community welfare. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I'd like to address that claim. Deborah, you had my backup truck impounded on Tuesday before a forecast major blizzard. When I pointed out that I needed that equipment for my business and that we had a serious storm coming, you told me that wasn't your concern. You had it impounded again on Wednesday afternoon, just hours before the storm hit. On Thursday morning, when my primary truck broke down and I couldn't access the backup, because the impound lot wasn't open yet. You called me demanding that I plow the neighborhood for free. When I explained that I had paying clients with legitimate emergencies, you accused me of being selfish. Now you're standing here telling everyone that I refuse to help my neighbors out of some personal failing, when the reality is that you created the equipment shortage that limited my response options. The bylaw regarding commercial vehicles is clear, Deborah shot back. You signed an agreement to follow those bylaws when you purchased your home. The bylaw gives the board discretion in enforcement for extenuating circumstances. You chose not to exercise that discretion because you prioritized appearances over practical need. A man is in the hospital because the streets weren't clear. That's not on me. That's on you. The room erupted in arguments. Jerry Phillips called for order, banging a gavel that nobody paid attention to. Finally, Patricia Keller made a motion to schedule a special election for the following month. Amanda Norton, who'd been silent through most of the meeting, seconded the motion. Even Jerry, after a long hesitation, voted in favor. Deborah was outvoted 3-1. "This is a witch hunt," she said, gathering her papers. "I've served this community faithfully for 3 years. Everything I've done has been to protect property values and maintain the standards that make Cascade Creek a desirable place to live. You're going to throw that away because one person broke the rules and there were unfortunate consequences." "You could have worked with me," I said. "You could have said, Ethan, park that truck behind your house where it's not visible from the street, or keep it in the garage and we'll work something out. Instead, you had it impounded. Twice. During a blizzard. That's not enforcement, that's something else." She left without responding. Jerry and Amanda stayed behind to finalize the election details. The vote would be held in 4 weeks, with ballot measures addressing both Deborah's removal and potential amendments to several bylaws, including the commercial vehicle restrictions. The Patterson lawsuit continued to move forward. I was deposed in March, giving testimony about the timeline of events and how the truck impoundment had impacted my ability to respond to the storm. The Patterson family's lawyers were building a case that the HOA's failure to maintain accessible common areas during a weather emergency, combined with Deborah's decision to impound equipment that could have mitigated that failure, constituted gross negligence. During discovery, some interesting facts emerged. It turned out Deborah had been warned by the HOA's insurance carrier about selective enforcement issues. After the solar panel incident that Marcus Webb had reported on, the insurance company had specifically instructed the board to exercise more discretion in bylaw enforcement to avoid liability. Deborah had ignored that guidance. The insurance company was now threatening to deny coverage for the Patterson lawsuit based on that willful disregard. The special election took place on the last Saturday of March. Out of 312 eligible voters, 239 cast ballots. The measure to remove Deborah Henderson from the board passed with 216 votes in favor. Only 23 people voted to keep her. The bylaw amendments also passed, including a revision to the commercial vehicle restrictions that allowed for reasonable accommodation of work vehicles with board approval. Deborah didn't attend the results meeting. In fact, she put her house on the market the following week and moved out of Cascade Creek by the end of April. I heard through Frank that she'd bought a condo in Denver, somewhere without an HOA where she could avoid the irony of being subjected to the same kind of rules she'd enforced so rigidly. The Patterson lawsuit settled in May. The HOA's insurance company ended up paying a substantial sum to Robert Patterson for his medical expenses and pain and suffering. As part of the settlement, The HOA also agreed to contract with a professional snow removal service for common areas during future winter weather events. They approached me first, but I declined. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. My business actually grew from all the publicity. Marcus Webb's investigative segment had portrayed me as a hardworking small business owner victimized by HOA overreach, and I got a flood of new clients who wanted to support that underdog narrative. I hired 2 employees for the next winter season and added 3 more trucks to my fleet. The primary truck got repaired and ran perfectly. The backup became the secondary vehicle in regular rotation. Frank Morrison ended up rejoining the HOA board after Deborah's departure, running on a platform of common sense enforcement and community-focused governance. He won easily. One of his first acts was to formally apologize on behalf of the board for how the truck situation had been handled. "We lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to be," he said at the meeting where they voted to approve the apology. "It's not about enforcing rules for the sake of rules. It's about maintaining a community where people want to live. Sometimes that means exercising discretion. Sometimes that means working with people instead of against them. We forgot that, and someone got hurt as a result." I accepted the apology, though I made it clear I hadn't forgotten what had happened. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. The following winter, Boulder got hit with another major storm, this one dropping 32 inches over a 48-hour period. My trucks ran smoothly, servicing all my contracted clients without any equipment failures. The HOA's new snow removal service kept the Cascade Creek streets clear. Nobody fell. Nobody got hurt. Nobody ended up in the hospital because they couldn't get out of their driveway. I still see the spot where my backup truck used to sit in my driveway during that chaotic February. The truck parks in my expanded garage now, along with the rest of my growing fleet. Every time I drive past Deborah Henderson's old house, now occupied by a young family with 2 kids and a golden retriever, I think about how close things came to going completely wrong. A man could have died from that fall. My business could have been destroyed by broken contracts. All because one person valued rules over reason. The experience taught me something important about power and how people use it. Some folks get a little authority and treat it like a weapon to beat people into compliance. Others understand that authority comes with responsibility, that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. Deborah Henderson fell into the first category. She saw a bylaw and a violation, and that was all she needed to act. The consequences, the context, the human impact of her decisions, none of that mattered as much as being right. But being right isn't enough when you're dealing with people's lives and livelihoods. Sometimes you have to look beyond the letter of the law and consider the spirit behind it. Sometimes you have to exercise judgment and discretion. Sometimes you have to accept that your need to enforce every single rule exactly as written is less important than making sure your neighbors are safe and your community functions. I don't think Deborah ever understood that. Even after the lawsuit, the settlement, the election, and the public humiliation, I doubt she saw herself as anything other than a victim of ungrateful residents who didn't appreciate her dedication to community standards. That kind of rigid mindset doesn't change just because consequences finally catch up to it. As for me, I kept my head down and focused on building my business. I joined the Cascade Creek board the following year, not because I wanted authority, but because I wanted to make sure what happened to me didn't happen to anyone else. We revised several bylaws, implemented more flexible enforcement procedures, and established an appeals process for residents who felt they'd been unfairly cited for violations. The changes weren't dramatic. We didn't eliminate rules or turn Cascade Creek into some kind of free-for-all where people could do whatever they wanted. We just added common sense to the equation. We asked, does this enforcement serve the community's actual interests before taking action? We talked to residents instead of immediately jumping to fines and impoundment. We remembered that we were neighbors first and an HOA second. It made a difference. The constant conflict that had characterized Deborah's tenure faded away. People started attending board meetings without feeling like they were walking into hostile territory. The neighborhood felt more like a community and less like a battleground. On the 2-year anniversary of that terrible blizzard, I ran into Patricia Keller at the grocery store. She was the one who'd organized the petition to remove Deborah, and she'd since joined the board herself. "Can you believe it's been 2 years?" she asked while we waited in the checkout line. "Barely. Sometimes it feels like last week, other times like a lifetime ago." Robert Patterson is doing well, in case you were wondering. I saw him at the community center last month. He's fully recovered, walking without assistance. His kids dropped the personal vendetta against Deborah, figured the settlement was enough. That's good to hear. I always felt bad about what happened to him. You shouldn't. You did everything you could under impossible circumstances. Deborah was the one who created those circumstances. She made her choices, and she lived with the consequences. We parted ways in the parking lot, and I drove home thinking about consequences. Deborah had faced them in the form of public backlash, removal from the board, and eventually leaving the community entirely. But consequences aren't always about punishment. Sometimes they're about learning. Sometimes they're about understanding that actions have impacts beyond what we intend or expect. I learned that lesson during that blizzard. I learned that having backup plans matters, but so does being able to access them when you need them. I learned that contracts and commitments mean something, that people depend on you showing up when you promise you will. I learned that fighting petty authority sometimes means standing your ground even when it would be easier to just comply. Most importantly, I learned that communities function best when the people in charge remember they're serving others, not ruling over them. When board members see themselves as servants of the community rather than enforcers of arbitrary standards, everyone benefits. When they exercise judgment and discretion instead of rigid enforcement, the neighborhood becomes a better place to live. That should have been obvious. It's the kind of thing you'd think anyone in a leadership position would understand instinctively. But somehow, people like Deborah Henderson get into power and forget that basic truth. They fall in love with their authority and lose sight of their responsibility. I made sure not to make that mistake during my time on the board. Whenever we faced an enforcement decision, I asked myself, does this serve the community, or does it just serve my need to prove I'm in charge? If the answer was the latter, I voted against it. Not every board member agreed with me every time, but we usually found common ground. The commercial vehicle bylaw never came up again. The revised version we'd passed after Deborah's removal worked well, allowing people to keep work vehicles on their property as long as they weren't eyesores and didn't create legitimate problems. Nobody abused it. Nobody tried to park a semi-trailer in their driveway or turn their garage into a commercial fleet depot. People just wanted to keep their work trucks accessible for their jobs, and the board let them do that. It was a small thing, really. One bylaw revision in one HOA in one development in Colorado. But it represented something larger, the idea that rules should serve people, not the other way around, that regulations need to bend sometimes to accommodate reality. That authority means responsibility, not just power. I think about that every winter when the first big storm rolls through. I think about Sarah Chen's mother needing to get to dialysis. I think about Robert Patterson falling in his snow-buried driveway. I think about my backup truck sitting in an impound lot while my primary vehicle broke down at the worst possible moment. And I remember how close everything came to going catastrophically wrong, because one person cared more about being right than being reasonable. That's the lesson of that February blizzard. Not that HOAs are inherently bad, or that bylaws don't matter, or that rules should be ignored. The lesson is that leadership requires wisdom, that authority demands discretion, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is step back and ask whether your actions serve the people you're supposed to be helping. Deborah Henderson never learned that lesson. But the rest of us did, and Cascade Creek became a better community because of it. Not perfect, not conflict-free, but better. More humane. More understanding of the reality that life doesn't always fit neatly into bylaw subsections and enforcement procedures. 3 years after that blizzard, I'm still running my snow removal business. Still serving many of the same clients who trusted me during that chaotic storm. Still parking my trucks in my garage at my house in Cascade Creek, where no one bothers me about commercial vehicle restrictions, because everyone remembers what happened when rigid enforcement replaced common sense. The neighborhood has moved on. New families have moved in. The trauma of that winter has faded into community history, the kind of story old-timers tell newcomers to explain why certain bylaws exist and why the board operates the way it does. But for those of us who lived through it, who watched it unfold in real time, the memories remain sharp. I never got a real apology from Deborah Henderson. She left without acknowledging that her actions contributed to Robert Patterson's injury, to my equipment crisis, to the chaos that engulfed our community during those 72 hours. Maybe she still believes she was right, that she was just enforcing the rules everyone had agreed to follow. Maybe she's convinced herself that the outcome was everyone else's fault for not being more prepared or more compliant. I don't know, and I've stopped caring. The important thing is that the community learned from what happened. We changed our bylaws, our enforcement procedures, and our entire approach to governance. We stopped treating every violation like a crisis, and started treating our neighbors like people who deserved understanding and flexibility when circumstances warranted it. That's worth more than any apology Deborah could have offered. It's a lasting change that will benefit Cascade Creek residents for years to come. It's proof that even terrible situations can lead to positive outcomes if people are willing to learn from them and make necessary changes. So when I look back on that February blizzard now, I don't just see the chaos and stress and equipment failures. I see a turning point, a moment when a community decided it could do better. And we did.